The Eastern Front was a battlefield ruled by extremes. Blizzards that erased whole battalions, forests where sound traveled farther than sight, and nights so dark that even flares struggled to carve outlines in the void. It was here that a new kind of warrior emerged. Not armored, not mechanized, silent, invisible, deadly. Soviet snipers were not born. They were carved by necessity. In 1941, when the Wehrmacht swept across the USSR like a blade of fire, every rifle, every steady hand, every moment of patience became a strategic asset. The Red Army needed eyes that could see through chaos, nerves that did not tremble, and shooters who understood the battlefield as a living organism. Training schools were built at speed. Basements, old gymnasiums, forest clearings turned into classrooms where recruits learned breathing, camouflage, stalking, and the art of vanishing. Instructors drilled students for hours on identifying micro-movements, a helmet tilt, a branch bending against the wind, a glint of metal. Each sniper learned that a shot was not fired at a target, it was fired at a moment. And moments on the Eastern Front were fleeting. As cities fell and winters deepened, Soviet snipers prepared to wage a quieter, colder war. By late 1941, the Soviet command understood they were fighting not just for territory, but for time. Time to train, to reorganize, to breathe. Snipers became a cornerstone of this desperate calculus. Dozens of specialized schools sprang up across Siberia and the Volga region. These were not ordinary academies. Recruits spent weeks lying motionless in snowdrifts, forced to control heartbeat, breath, and fear. They learned to build nests from branches, floorboards, broken furniture, anything the ruined world provided. Instructors emphasized discipline. A sniper could wait 12 hours for a single shot, muscles vibrating from cold, eyes burning from wind. They taught deception, leaving false tracks, mimicking animal behavior, using mirrors to mislead enemy spotters. Above all, they trained patience. A sniper wins before he fires, one instructor told his class. The bullet is only the confirmation. Many students were barely 18. Some were women who would soon become legends. When they left the schools, each carried not only a rifle, but a new identity, one that demanded silence, cunning, and absolute precision. The ruins of Stalingrad were a labyrinth of shattered concrete and endless echoes. Every courtyard, every factory floor, every staircase was a battlefield inside a battlefield. It was here that Vasily Zaitsev, a shepherd from the Urals, carved his name into history. Armed with a Mosin Nagant rifle and the instincts of a hunter, he turned the wrecked city into his hunting ground. Zaitsev understood Stalingrad better than any mapmaker, the lines of sight through collapsed windows, the blind spots beside boiler pipes, the patches of shadow untouched by daylight. He never fired twice from the same position. After each kill, he shifted, crawling through pipes, sliding beneath rubble, memorizing every shell crater. His partners acted as spotters, rotating roles to avoid fatigue. The Germans called snipers ghosts, but Zaitsev was something else, a mathematician of death. Every shot had calculation, range, wind, debris, enemy habits. By winter 1942, his confirmed count exceeded 200. To the Red Army, he became a symbol of defiance. To the Wehrmacht, he was a nightmare with a rifle. One of the greatest surprises to the Germans was the sheer presence of women among the USSR's deadliest marksmen. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, Rosa Shanina, Natalia Kovshova, names whispered through dugouts with a mix of fear and disbelief. They were not propaganda myths. They were precision incarnate. Pavlichenko, a quiet history student from Odessa, became one of the deadliest snipers in world history, with 309 confirmed kills. Shanina, barely in her 20s, had accuracy that instructors called inhuman. The training for women was identical to men's: crawl through mud, survive exposure, hold a rifle steady after hours of motionless observation. Many women excelled because of their patience and emotional control. They learned camouflage so perfectly that even friendly troops sometimes walked past them unaware. Their presence shattered stereotypes across the front. German soldiers were stunned to find female footprints near sniper nests. Soviet troops, exhausted and demoralized, found hope seeing women fight with such mastery. These snipers did not just serve, they reshaped the Red Army's identity. Snipers survived by mastering invisibility. On the Eastern Front, where forests, factories, villages, and frozen steppes offered radically different landscapes, camouflage became an art form. Soviet snipers used everything: torn coats, sandbags, grass bundles, snow capes, soot rubbed into skin. They built blinds out of wreckage, clothing, even enemy equipment. Their goal was simple: to disappear into the environment so completely that they could watch an enemy battalion pass within meters without being detected. Movement was the true enemy. Snipers learned to crawl an inch at a time, pushing themselves forward with toes or elbows, controlling even the tremble of breath in sub-zero cold. Some wore white smocks in winter, becoming snowdrifts with rifles. In forests, they pinned leaves to their sleeves and helmets. They studied bird behavior to avoid alarming them. Even their rifles were wrapped to hide reflections and reduce sound. A successful sniper was not the one who fired the most shots, but the one who was never seen until it was too late. The winter of 1942 to 43 forged a new kind of warrior on the Eastern Front. Amid blizzards that erased the horizon and winds sharp enough to split skin, Soviet snipers learned to read the silence like scripture. Snow muffled footsteps, but it also betrayed movement. Breath rose like smoke. A poorly chosen position became a grave. In this frozen labyrinth, Soviet marksmen turned their rifles into instruments of patience, discipline, and quiet terror. Many worked in pairs, shooter and spotter, lying motionless for hours beneath white camouflage woven from bedsheets. Frost clung to eyelashes, rifles froze, and fingers stiffened despite wool and grease. But the cold worked both ways. German patrols moved slower, huddled for warmth, and often mistook shadows for safety. A single crack, sharp, clean, marked the work of a sniper who had waited for the perfect moment. Then silence returned, as absolute as the snow that swallowed footprints. These winter duels became legendary. Soviet snipers learned to angle shots, so the muzzle blast vanished into wind gusts. They packed snow around their rifles to reduce recoil dust and carved firing holes the width of a fist. In these sub-zero arenas, death came from distances where even trained soldiers struggled to understand what had happened. The front lines could shift by kilometers, but the winter battlefield of a sniper rarely changed. A patch of snow, a breath, a heartbeat, a single decisive shot. While armies around the world relied almost exclusively on men for sharpshooting, the Soviet Union unleashed an unprecedented force: female snipers. They arrived from schools, farms, universities, thin, determined, and underestimated. Their instructors quickly learned the truth. Women were often calmer under pressure, possessed sharper fine motor control, and showed remarkable patience, waiting still as statues for a target to emerge. One of these warriors, Lyudmila Pavlichenko, later called Lady Death, became a symbol of deadly precision, with over 300 confirmed kills. Yet she was not an anomaly. She was part of a phenomenon. Thousands of young women passed through sniper schools where they learned camouflage, stalking, trench infiltration, and psychological discipline. Instructors trained them to slow their pulse, observe wind by the sway of grass, and fire between heartbeats. At the front, female snipers earned respect the hard way. They crawled through minefields, hid in chimneys of ruined villages, and waited in stagnant water for hours while insects crawled across their faces. Many operated at night, using the moonlit snow for contrast. Germans feared them, spreading rumors that Soviet women could see in the dark or sense movement like animals. But behind the legend was human cost. Snipers often worked alone, carrying deep emotional scars from observing their targets so intimately, studying them, learning their routines, and then ending them with a single shot. Yet these women held their nerve, not for glory, but because each life they took meant one less German soldier advancing on their homeland. A sniper's bullet begins long before the trigger is pulled. It begins with the stalk, the slow, disciplined crawl toward a firing position that might take hours or even days. Soviet snipers mastered this art to perfection. They learned to move like part of the earth itself. A shift the width of a hand could give them away. A sudden motion could ruin days of preparation. They read terrain like a second language. A fallen tree could mask a rifle barrel. A shell crater might hide a shooting nest. Tall grass, scorched rubble, even dead bodies became part of their camouflage. Snipers smeared mud on their faces, wove branches into their uniforms, and carried small spades to reshape the earth around them. They became invisible by dissolving into the battlefield. Sometimes the stalk was a mind rather than body test. Snipers crawled as artillery thundered over them, or while enemy patrols passed so close they could hear them breathe. They slowed their heartbeats to calm their rifles. They memorized escape routes before taking the first shot, because a sniper's first bullet created a second battlefield, the one where the enemy hunted the hunter. Those who excelled at the stalk became legends. They infiltrated German lines to eliminate officers, machine gun crews, and artillery observers. One well-placed shot could halt an advancing company or break a counterattack. Snipers were not merely shooters. They were tacticians, shaping battles through silent decisions made in the long crawl before dawn. The most feared battles were the ones fought far from the roar of armies, duels between master snipers, where victory often came down to intellect, nerve, and patience. These duels could last hours or stretch into days. Each side studied the other through tiny slits of rubble, shutter cracks, or branches barely thicker than twigs. A reflection, a shadow, or a moment of impatience could decide everything. Soviet snipers learned to lure their opponents. They raised helmets on sticks, tossed small stones to mimic movement, or placed mannequins dressed in uniforms to draw the enemy's fire. Once a rival revealed his position, even for a heartbeat, the duel shifted. Now it was a chess match played through rifles. Some of the most intense duels occurred in Stalingrad, where entire buildings turned into battlegrounds between two invisible adversaries. Snipers crawled through ventilation shafts, hid between broken pipes, or waited motionless in abandoned tramcars. Their duels became whispered legends told around trench fires, stories of men who stared death in the eye and won through pure will. but the cost was unforgiving. A single mistake ended a career or a life. Snipers rarely died cleanly. Their opponents ensured that. Sniper duels were not heroic battles of honor. They were brutal survival contests in the shadows of a war already drowning in blood. Behind every legendary sniper stood a rifle that became an extension of the shooter's will. The Mosin Nagant M91/30 with PU scope became the iconic weapon of Soviet snipers. It was not elegant by Western standards, but it was rugged, accurate, and deadly. Its bolt-action design was simple enough to survive mud, ice, and rubble. Snipers tuned them like instruments, polishing triggers, adjusting stocks, and testing bullets for perfect weight. But tools were more than rifles. Snipers carried range cards filled with wind notes, improvised camouflage nets, and grease pencils for marking windows and firing angles. Some created makeshift suppressors using canned goods or cloth to confuse enemy patrols. They wore white suits in winter, earth tones in summer, and charcoal-smudged faces during urban night hunts. Every detail mattered: sling tension, cheek weld, the angle of the sun, the color of the backdrop. Soviet instructors taught recruits that a sniper's true weapon was not the rifle, but the mind. A calm shooter with a battered Mosin was deadlier than a nervous one with a precision-made rifle. The result was a generation of marksmen who could strike from the shadows with terrifying consistency. Their tools, combined with discipline and instinct, earned them a reputation that echoed across the front, the deadliest shots in a war full of death. When darkness fell on the Eastern Front, entire divisions halted, but the snipers did not. Night turned the battlefield into a world of silhouettes and instinct, and Soviet marksmen learned to own that world. The moon became their lantern, the wind their ally. German soldiers dreaded the hours after dusk, when patrols ventured out with trembling nerves, stepping lightly as if the ground itself held breath. Night operations required a different kind of courage. Snipers moved low and slow, guided by memory rather than sight. They marked routes during daylight, memorizing broken chimneys, tree stumps, and the faint glimmer of frozen ponds. At night, these landmarks blurred into shadows. Only experience kept them from losing their way. They crawled through wet grass, across icy fields, and into ruined attics where rats scurried over their boots. Soviet sharpshooters used the darkness to settle close to key choke points, bridges, crossroads, collapsed rail lines, and listened. Footsteps, whispered orders, the metallic click of a bolt. Sound mattered more than sight. A sniper learned to judge distance from echoes, to aim by instinct refined through hundreds of shots. One well-timed bullet could halt a night advance or send a patrol scattering in panic. But night hunting came with deadly risks. Snipers could not rely on their scopes. Moon glare could betray their position. Friendly fire was constant danger, and disoriented units sometimes mistook their own snipers for infiltrators. Yet those who mastered the night became legends whispered about on both sides of the front, ghosts who struck without warning and vanished into the black. A sniper's greatest weapon wasn't marksmanship, it was invisibility. Soviet instructors drilled camouflage techniques until they became instinctual. This was artistry born from desperation. Snipers crafted ghillie suits from burlap sacks, grass, twigs, even strips of enemy uniforms. Some stitched bits of netting into their coats to catch snow or leaves, creating living sculptures that changed with the season. Urban snipers painted their rifles with soot or charcoal, wrapped barrels in cloth, and dragged rubble into firing nests. In forests, they blended with moss and pine. In fields, they covered themselves with dirt and weeds until they smelled like the very earth they hid in. A well-camouflaged sniper could lie motionless while enemy soldiers walked within arm's reach, unaware that death watched them from a cluster of broken bricks. Camouflage was also psychological warfare. Snipers learned to make the enemy paranoid by firing from unpredictable angles. They used reflections from shattered glass to fake positions or placed decoy rifles in windows to draw fire. A battlefield controlled by a skilled sniper stopped being terrain. It became a trap. But the craft demanded superhuman discipline. Snipers held still while insects crawled under their collars, while sweat froze on their backs, while shells burst overhead. Their bodies ached, their lungs burned from shallow breathing, but movement meant death. Patience became a religion. In the end, the sniper who blended best survived longest and shaped the battlefield far beyond the reach of infantry or artillery. Nowhere did Soviet snipers earn their fearsome reputation more than in the apocalyptic ruins of Stalingrad. The city was a sniper's paradise and hell in equal measure. Entire apartment blocks collapsed into jagged cliffs of concrete. Factories became mazes of steel beams. Stairwells spiraled into darkness. Every floor, every window, every shattered wall was a potential firing point. Here fought the most famous of them all, Vasily Zaitsev. His duels and ambushes became symbols of Soviet resilience. But he was not alone. Dozens of snipers, men and women, turned Stalingrad into a graveyard for German officers. They struck from ventilation shafts, from water towers, from piles of broken furniture, then melted back into the ruins. German soldiers advanced room by room, but the city felt alive, watching, waiting, ready to unleash a bullet at the slightest mistake. Snipers documented their kills meticulously, not for glory, but for tactical learning. They noted how German officers moved, how patrols reacted, which windows drew counterfire. Zaitsev established a sniper school inside the city's ruins, teaching new recruits between bombardments. His students, some barely older than boys, became hunters overnight, defending each street with the cold precision of veterans. In Stalingrad, snipers fought not only the enemy, but starvation, disease, and exhaustion. They fired from rubble heated by burning corpses or froze in cellars that smelled of damp and death. Their rifles rusted from constant exposure, their hands cracked from cold. Yet their presence shifted the balance. Snipers slowed German advances, disrupted logistics, and shattered morale. In the heart of a dying city, they proved that one skilled shooter could shape the fate of thousands. War tests bodies, but sniping tests the soul. A sniper must watch a target for hours, eating, talking, laughing, before ending their life with a single touch of the trigger. This intimacy weighed heavily on Soviet sharpshooters. Many described their first kill as a dividing line, the person they were before and the person they became after. Sniper training included lessons on psychological resilience. Instructors taught recruits how to detach from emotion, how to breathe through stress, how to slow their heartbeat and control adrenaline. But no amount of training could erase the human cost. Snipers witnessed death at close range more than any other soldier. They saw the moment life left the eyes. Some carried these images for decades. Yet snipers also felt a fierce sense of responsibility. They protected entire platoons by eliminating machine gun crews, artillery observers, and officers calling counterattacks. Every shot they fired could save dozens of comrades. This belief gave purpose to the cold calculations of their craft. Still, isolation was the hardest burden. Snipers often worked alone, far forward, surrounded by silence and tension. They learned to talk to themselves, to focus on small rituals, cleaning the rifle, adjusting gear, whispering mental notes, to stay sane. Some formed deep bonds with their spotters, trusting them more than family. These partnerships became lifelines, forged under fire, sealed in blood. Snipers survived because they mastered their own minds. Their greatest battles were fought within, against fear, guilt, fatigue, and doubt. When the war ended, many Soviet snipers returned home as anonymous heroes. A few became legends, most faded quietly into civilian life. But their impact did not vanish. The tactics they refined, stalking, camouflage, counter-sniping, became foundations of modern military doctrine. Their rifles, especially the Mosin Nagant with PU scope, influenced generations of marksman weapons. Entire nations studied their combat reports. Military academies dissected their duels. The concept of the force multiplier, one soldier shaping a battlefield, became central to post-war strategy. Even today, special forces around the world still teach principles born on the snowy fields of the Eastern Front. But the true legacy of Soviet snipers is not technical. It is human. They proved that courage could be silent, that war's deadliest warriors could work alone in the shadows, that a single determined person could change the outcome of a battle without ever charging a trench. Their stories became part of the wider memory of the war, tales of endurance, precision, sacrifice, and unbreakable will. Many snipers were buried without honors, their names lost to time, their kill counts forgotten. Yet every shot they fired echoed through history. They fought not for fame, but for survival, for comrades, for the hope of returning home. Their legacy lives in every soldier trained to be patient, disciplined, and unyielding. Warriors shaped by shadows, forged by silence.